Good morning, everyone. I'm Kieran Leach. I'm an HPC Systems Specialist at EPCC, and for whatever since I've committed a technical commit coordinator for the National Federated Computer Services Network Plus. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're planning for the roadmap. This is really, I'm talking largely here to our projects to try and frame what you're going to be contributing to. And after that, and in addition to our program, John will be talking a little bit about where we are and where we're going. So, the roadmap structure. The roadmap is our key output. It is the key output. It is what we're here for. I mean, there will be other outputs, but none of them will matter in the same way. It's going to provide UKRI with our vision of what can be achieved, levels of federation, technologies. We will prioritize details of options, of scenarios, of costings and things like that, and activities spanning the full range of investments, along with a justification from our perspective of why these are good things to do. Now, if we don't get, the project outputs are key to this. Without output from our projects, we really have nothing apart from, well, we had some ideas and we started with the ideas, but we really need your inputs. You are the people who are doing the hard yards that will get us what we need. The contributions to the roadmap come in core forms. The most important thing is providing recommendations and findings in outputs from your flexible fund project. So that is our most important input. You can contribute at these workshops, even asking an interesting question to a panel. That's valuable. That is always valuable. And finally, we will have drafts of the roadmap. This isn't going to be one and done. It's not going to just come out in September and you see it for the first time there. As we approach the summer, you are going to see drafts, and we are going to ask that the whole community respond to those. So, evolution of the roadmap structure. I'm going to go a little bit over the same ground as we did in September, because there's a lot of new people here, but we have been evolving our vision of the roadmap structure. We now envisage having both a core outcomes document and a full report document or documents. The core outcomes being intended to be the high-level executive summary, with the full report and anything else we produce being what is necessary to fully understand our reasoning for that. We'll clearly reference from one to the other. It's really critical that you are able to pick up a core outcome and say, well, why is that being done, and chase down that rabbit hole. Again, the full report will then reference to whatever goes in the appendices and eventually to your project reports. We're not going to replicate your project reports. We've discussed in our meetings that they'll need to be published with the DOI, and we'll talk in the coming months about exact structure necessary there. But those will stand on their own, and we will reference down to them. And finally, this structure is fluid. It's entirely possible we get into writing this and decide that the structure we're discussing here is a dreadful idea, and we change it. We reserve that right. So, core outcomes document, we intend to be talking about our high-level vision of the Federation. That is benefits and the contribution we'll make to the UK as a whole. This is where we talk about how the Federation can take forward the UK government's goals or enhance in the UK. Key outcomes. These are the proposals which taken jointly will progress Federation. This is how we think you do it. There will obviously be options and scenarios here, but there might be some options and scenarios that we leave for the full report because we don't believe they're key. And there'll be some idea of resources needed there. And we'll answer the key questions. You should be able to read this document and understand the key questions. What is Federation? Why is it useful? And what carbon activities would be involved? If you wish to learn more, you go to the full report. I won't go through all of this in detail. We'll put in copy of these slides, but we'll be covering what the landscape looks like, more details on vision. We will cover challenges, gaps. We will look at where the problems are, where the pain points will be. We'll talk about full activities, options, and scenarios, and we'll give a clear 5-year timeline for a National Federated Compute Services actual program rather than networkless. The full report will target more members of the DRI community with an interest. It'll be a document that if you don't know what IAM means, you're probably going to have more trouble with, or at least need to refer to Google and appendices more. We will structure it to clearly correspond to the core outcomes document, and we will clearly reference down to the appendices, and most of the appendices will probably be your project reports. Now, key question, how can you contribute? So I'm reiterating things I've already said here, but they're very important. The core output from each project is the project report. It must capture all outcomes from the project of relevance to NFCS. You may well have outputs that are useful but not directly relevant to us. I'm happy in our meetings to discuss those. The ones that we absolutely need in that document. It must be published with the DOI. Please get in touch with us if you need somewhere for that to happen. We can make arrangements. Interim findings pending the project report are welcome and encouraged, and that can be at any point. I know some projects have been talking to us about having workshops where we'll discuss these, and that's going to be brilliant. Anytime we can get interim findings, we're very happy about that. We don't want to wait until July to know what we're writing. We'll take key findings, and those will be synthesized and included in the roadmap. Every single project's output will be considered. However, not all will necessarily or could be included. We will draw from submissions where relevant. Now, there are other routes, and for those of you not on projects, there is space for you to contribute. The key way that everyone can contribute, well, key ways that you can do that are to review and provide feedback to drafts of the roadmap, as I've already said. We welcome all feedback, and it is received gratefully. You can attend the conferences and workshops. So well done, you're here and you've contributed. Thank you. And you can submit relevant documents and reports which originate outside the NFCS. We are happy to look at other evidence and keen to do so. Some of it we may have already found, but if you have produced something that you believe is relevant, we will be shortly establishing a mechanism for submission of that. And if you are wanting to know what that is, please feel to drop me an email and I'll make sure you know when it comes around. Finally, the roadmap timeline, it's tight. None of us is expecting a relaxing summer. We are publishing this in September, so we are already down to 7 months. By the time we have all the final findings, it's going to be our early July reporting meeting, which will leave us with realistically 2 months, because you're going to need weeks for publication and people who care about fonts and things to look at it, which isn't me. You're lucky this isn't Wingdings. We do expect, as I've said, a draft report in early summer, which we'll welcome responses to. We'll include with that a clear detail of our timelines and how quickly we'd like responses, but please don't leave it till after the summer holidays. And as I've said again, we are keen to see interim findings. Every interim finding we get helps us be ready for where we'll be going. And finally, then the final roadmap will be presented in September. You'll hear more details of that as we approach the summer. I believe we're going to have a launch conference for that where everyone will get to see it. But hopefully by that point, it will be something that you'll already have been able to review, and that many of you will already have your fingerprints all over, whether it's from project outputs, reviews, comments, or whatever. And that is the end of my part, and I'll hand you now over to John.
Thank you, Kieran. So one of the things we've been doing is looking through all the projects submitted. So while we don't have the outputs of the project yet, we do have a ton of information there about what people are interested in, what are the priorities, what's important, because we can tell, because you made the effort to put together a project proposal and run a project on it. So you can already see the themes emerging just from that alone, even without those final reports. We're really happy about the breadth of engagement. We've covered at least 7 research councils directly with PIs working in those domain-specific areas. But then through their workshops, their surveys, there's a much wider breadth that goes beyond that. And so one of the things we'll really want to be able to do is put together that evidence about what communities we reach. So it's important for projects when you're doing your workshops and your surveys that you know who you're reaching and that you let us know. And that not only lets us understand the scale and the reach of the overall project, it also helps us weigh up the evidence and understand, right, where is it coming from? How many people were involved in this? A survey that had 5 respondents is perhaps not as impactful as one that had 1,000, for example. So that will be really, really important for us. So here are some, if not all, of the groups that have been involved so far in putting all of this together. And some of the institutions, apologies, if you'll miss stuff, let me know and we'll get you added on there. This was all trolled from all the project proposals. There's hundreds of pages of documentation there to put all of this together. I mentioned that AI is quite useful at that, but it's not perfect. So again, just flashing up some of the institutes and organisations involved in here. And we've also been looking at, what areas are we covering? We organised the project into these 3 pillars around technology, community and governance, just starting to understand what's the coverage of all of it. And again, this is just drawn from what people have said they're going to do in their projects. And so we've got all kinds of things around technical evaluation, about looking at existing reference architectures, collecting user stories, looking at what requirements might start looking like, etc. And you saw a couple of talks yesterday about inclusion. And then very important is how do you tie it all together with the rules and regulations and the oversight and the governance. So we've got several projects that look into that. So we want to make sure that we've got all this coverage of the thing, and then there are bound to be gaps. It's a very big project putting together federation, but hopefully we've got enough to move on to the next steps. So on the next step, so here is the dream. This is what a project looks like when you're initiating change. It starts down there and everything's smooth and flat, and then you have a nice gentle transition, or maybe a steep transition, and then it's smooth and flat again. Life isn't like that, unfortunately. It looks more like that. And they're all a mess. So what we need to understand is, if we're starting down here where we've got disciplinary federations, international federations, whatever, and everybody's at different stages of that journey towards engagement, how do we pull it together so that we end up with something that looks like a success? And so one of the things we're going to need to do with the roadmap is try and find the answer to that question, so that when we move from down here, which is kind of T0, roadmap comes out, we need a period of planning to turn roadmap into delivery, and then a period of delivery. And the reality is that delivery never ends. You need the federation to be a growing thing. It's not, we do this for 5 years to get the business as usual, and then we lock it in stone and move on to other things, and it just keeps going. That won't work. Technology's changing, requirements are changing. Everything is always in flux. And so what needs to happen is that needs to come together into something that can always self-renew. And it's always refreshing, and it's always rebuilding itself to meet the needs of the current period. Understanding how to build that, hopefully we'll get some clues from the roadmap, but that's probably something that will evolve during this period, and understanding how to put it together. There's also some really important questions around the structure and the scope, and just to get the alliteration, I've got structure, scope and subsystems. Where does decision making sit? How does this lock into existing structures? What decisions should be made by UKRI? What decisions should be made by individual groups and federations within federation? How should any coordination of this work together to be appropriately representative, so that it actually fulfills the needs of the communities that are doing work within it? And how do we facilitate it without trampling on everybody's autonomy? So coming in and say, right, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, isn't a way to pull all that together. So how do we do that? How do we make sure the input from community comes in and really makes it come together to deliver what's needed, rather than what maybe I think is needed or somebody else thinks is needed? And then there's a whole technical piece, which is huge. We've got so many technologies, so much existing stuff. How do we link it together in a way that is achievable, and dare I say, at a relatively low budget level, right? If we threw a couple of 100 million at building the technology, we could probably do it fairly quickly, but that's not going to happen, and it's definitely not an efficient way to do it. It might be quicker, but you have to pay for it. So what we're going to need to pull out of the information we're getting from the projects and from what's gone before in previous looks at this kind of thing is what structure's needed, who are the participants, Where does it sit in the overall big picture? And then what do we actually need to do to make that happen, to bootstrap it into existence? So I like drawing diagrams, and I was sitting on the train coming back from a meeting, so I just started putting boxes on a bit of PowerPoint. This is not a proposal. This is just a way of me organising my thoughts and then putting some colours on. If we look at how NFCS-Network Plus is currently organised, that's sort of the blue box and the sort of orangey red box there. But that's too small. That's not enough, and it can't do the job of actually building a federation. And so there'll need to be other boxes that fit onto there, and those are in grey. What we need to do with the roadmap and looking at the evidence that we're getting and thinking about it and discussing with UKRI and DCIT and other partners is, what should these other boxes be? How do they fit in? Who's in charge of them? Who's making the decisions? Who's funding it? How does it all get in there? How does it come together? So there's a lot to think about there. And not all of that will be done by the roadmap, but the roadmap will be saying this needs to be done. And just to demonstrate the reason why I do particle physics for my science and not graphic design. That looks better on the big screen. I tried to line it up with the colours because, you know, we organised into pillars. And so we've got governance and policy, community and technology with the pillars we wanted to arrange the project around in order to generate the roadmap. Those are probably not necessarily the areas for delivery, though they might be. So I tried to colour them in so you could see. So, you know, this bit's clearly governance, but where we engage with community, and that might be a body to allow that responsiveness, that clearly transcends community and governance. And over here, where we need to develop the technological solutions, and in particular, perhaps not the solutions, but the interfaces and standards that we heard about yesterday, this idea that you don't specify, right, use that software stack. What you do is you say that software stack must be able to talk to this software stack using this one of these protocols. Use whatever you want, source it from wherever, but to talk to the rest of the federation, you need to work this way. Somehow that's got to come in there, and we need to figure out a way to make that come together and actually make some decisions about what will be in, and that naturally will need to draw on the communities. There will undoubtedly need to be some federation services. It won't be completely decentralized with this provider runs this provider runs that. I think there was a thing somebody said yesterday, there's the boring and things that people don't want to do. Maybe that's what sits in that box where that gets commissioned, because the stuff that's interesting, there'll be people that want to do it. So there's something there. So we have to think about all of these things and make recommendations on it coming out of the roadmap. So I'm going to stop there and leave it at that. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Yep, this diagram here, the thing you're missing is the ongoing maintenance, service operation, you know, keeping things running. You R&D and policy development is one thing. You know, there's a working group keeping those services running, checking, you know, monitoring, all this kind of stuff. And that's your ongoing, you know, cost, you know,
Yeah.
when you get to the end of your S-curve graph.
Yeah, absolutely. In a previous version of this that I simplified, I had a box over here that somehow is you sort of transition this at the beginning and mainly about development, how we bring it into being, and then some of this winds down to just be the continuous update, and you focus more perhaps elsewhere on that operational. Exactly, because they're the people who defined it. They're probably best placed to help do the operations, but it also needs to be done. This is an important thing here about how do you build something that runs indefinitely, right? So you can't think of it, the building of it you can view as a project, but once you get past that point, it has to have a way to continue, has to have a way for people who don't want to be in there anymore to move on to the next thing in their life, and people who want to come and join. And so you need a structure that allows for that in a very natural way without, you know, there being complications. It should be viewed as a natural part of the process. And so you need to structure this so that it's a living thing that just keeps going and going and going.
Hi there, it's Aaron Parsons from Southampton. We're relatively new to this scene, and we're definitely interested in what we're proposing there. How do I make sure I'm included on the communications? What's the communications?
So we have a relatively low traffic mailing list that you could sign up to. We have our LinkedIn stream where we make announcements, and we have our web pages. So those are the, if you go to the web page, then I think everything's on there. If it's not, drop us an email and we'll sort it out.
Hi, thank you, Kieran, that mentioned about the DOI open access thing. So if we want to do that, if it is, we now thinking about publish a paper about the EDI for our experience. Is it the open access course you will cover?
That's a very good question.
But another thing that if it's, we could do a PP first, definitely have a DOI. But if later, if the paper can publish, it can support our open access course, that would be useful.
I think so there are two issues with that. I don't think we have a budget line for that, but we may have the money. So I'm not promising anything. The other thing is by the end of September, this project closes, we can't book any expenses after that point. So there's a time limitation there. For what we need to do for the roadmap, we do expect everything to be publicly available, but there are sort of non-peer reviewed publication things that are free, that allow you to put it online and get the DOI. And if you've got avenues to do that, do it however you wish. If you don't know how to do that or you can't do that, we have ways to help you to put it all on there. But we'd like all of those findings to be public and open. And anything that we want to include in the roadmap, we want people to be able to go back and look at it.
So after September, will the website go down? You can repeat my question.
So
Or what would happen?
someone will have to pay for the website after September, but I think we can find a way to do that. It's not very expensive.
It has to happen.
Yeah, so donations at the back for the continuing to support the website. I'll find a budget, we'll be fine.
Thank you. I don't have a sub-project, but if I did, I would be asking, do you want the sub-projects to produce the costings or not? Or is that something that you guys are going to take over? Because you talk about costing scenarios. So do you want the sub-projects to provide cost estimates, or are you going to take care of that?
So I think it'll depend on what the outcomes of the project are. If your project is proposing a very specific piece of work, I don't think we require costings. I think that's something that would be in the next phase of the project. If you want to supply cost estimates of things, that's absolutely fine. But I don't think we want the outputs of these projects necessarily to be, here's a proposal for the next phase. We want it to be the evidence to write that proposal. The firmer it can be, the better. That's great, but it doesn't have to be. It's about that will come. This is for a roadmap. The next step is a delivery plan, and they're slightly different things.
So when we're talking about federation, we're talking about inclusion, and there has been a lot of conversation around emerging communities. When you're thinking about doing the roadmap, thinking about your recommendation, I know we have tried to have an FCS to be as diverse as possible, but even if we achieved it today, which I don't necessarily think we have, but we clearly have done efforts on that side. Even if it's incredibly diverse today, is not going to be in 2 years, 10 years, because new communities always come in. So I think you briefly mentioned new communities going into this process, but how does the recommendation, how does that thinking about getting emerging communities into thinking into this roadmap, into this federated network plan, how does that come in when you're writing the roadmap and when you're thinking about these different projects?
So I think the plan needs to, I mean, I sort of said it before, needs to have a way for people to enter, to join federation, and the barriers to that have to be as low as they can feasibly be made. But part of this will be tied up with funding and how people's research and their sort of innovation activities get funded. And there will be routes through there to make sure that if this is established, that through the funder, there are ways to be pointed towards it. And then our job is to make it so easy for people to come in and make use of it that it's just not an issue. And of course, there is a community aspect of this as well. I think it would be great if we could continue to run events highlighting what's going on within the community and showing where it's going in the future. And then those are things that also can be a point of contact where people can come in and hear all about it in one day, where they get bombarded with 10-minute talks and they come out with lots of ideas and whatever. And so there's that. And then the technological bit around making the barriers low, and making sure support is provided through whatever is the appropriate means to get people onboarded or not, right? There also needs to be a way for people to have the conversation where they say, actually, we don't need that. We've been told we should do it, but actually we're better off doing it another way. So that needs to be in there as well. But hopefully we make it as easy as possible.